Hello folks, this is John again, and today I'm gonna show you how I got that stankiest of bass tone. I think that's the best bass tone I ever got. I absolutely love it. So, starting with the bass guitar itself. This is a Marcus Miller V7. Not a super expensive bass, but somewhere in the mid-range, so this is affordable, if you ask me. So the way I set it up, let me talk you through it. Volume and tone all the way up. Pickup toggle is centered, so both pickups are in use. Treble is boosted all the way. Mid-range is pulled back all the way. And it's somewhere, the frequency is also centered, so that's somewhere in that honky mid-range area. And the low end, the bass is center position. These are D'Addario strings, nothing special. I think it's a 45 to 95 set or 100 set, and then a single 145 for the low A. That's pretty much it for the bass. And it's also very important to pull out the mid-range because that very much affects how the distortion signal I'm gonna walk you through now is actually behaving. So let's get into that now. So first of all, the guitar cable that the bass is also plugged into then goes around here, around the back. First of all into the DI box, and then the DI box splits it so I can record the raw DI. And it also sends the signal through my whole amp chain, and that is also being recorded then. This goes into noise gates. The super overdrive is not activated. The Proco Red, now this is the crux of that tone actually. So the distortion is set to about 9 o'clock. So this just really starts to break up. But because of how nasty the Proco Red is, that little bit is already enough to make it sound that stanky. The filter knob is turned all the way up, which means it actually filters out a lot of the high end, which is necessary because of how the amp tone is set up. We'll get into that in a little bit. And volume is all the way up. And that then goes, well, back into the noise gate, and that goes then here into our amplifier. And then on the amp, the Marshall DSL-20, I'm on the clean channel. And here the gain is all the way up, and this adds a very nice juicy grit to the whole thing. And then the volume is about 9 o'clock. Then over here you see the EQ. I have to pull the high end all the way down, or rather the treble, and also the presence, because the clean channel on this amp sounds very bright, almost shrill actually. So this is very necessary. And mid-range is all the way up, pretty much all the time for this amp, because it kind of sounds a little bit scooped. And now before you go ahead whining that I plug a bass guitar into a guitar amplifier, that is not a problem whatsoever. A guitar amplifier doesn't really care whether you plug a guitar or a bass guitar into it. What does matter is the cabinet and the speaker in it. Because guitar speakers are not designed to move a lot. And loud low frequencies from bass guitars makes them move a lot. So this cap is actually not plugged to the amp when I'm recording bass. Now before you go ahead whining that I have not plugged the cap to a tube amplifier, the speaker output of the amp goes to the torpedo captor. As you can see here, this is coming from the amp, and then this is sending the raw distorted signal also to my interface to be recorded and further processed. And here, this gray cable, that's actually coming from the cap. And when I want to, I can just plug it into the attenuated output, and we're good to go. And if you're wondering, yes, that is a kitchen cart. That is my kitchen cart of doom. And now let me show you how I process all of that in my DAW. So here's the raw bass tone again. It sounds so nasty. So let's go through it step by step. Let's bypass everything and just solo this track right here. And let's put this to 0 dB. So this right now is just the bass DI. Raw DI, no processing whatsoever. Man, the bass alone already sounds so gnarly to begin with. And that's also so important for a good bass tone, is to have an actual good bass. So that's that. Then let's check out this distorted bass sound. Yeah, it needs a cabinet because this is just raw distortion. And on here, I load up the Mesa Powerhouse by Rosen Digital. For funsies, here's also the Ampeg SVT by Rosen Digital. I really like that cab. It sounds so disgustingly good. And from here on out, I just go with my personal preferred method of doing bass tones. So on this distorted bass tone, I filter the low end at about 200 Hertz. You know what? Let's take out all the rest in here. We get to that in a bit. And then on the raw DI, I filter everything above 200 Hertz. And then I heavily compress it. Which I really need to do to get that low end nice and steady. You notice when I switch to the higher strings for that riff, then that low end drops down quite a bit, so that bass really needs that heavy-handed compression to keep that low end nice and steady. You also see it from the compressor on the gain reduction, how it jumps back and forth when I'm also switching between the strings. In this way, I find I get a much better low end than using just the low end coming from a distorted tone and an impulse response. Just listen to this. You notice the low end is much cleaner, it's much deeper as well. I really like that very low chesty feel from a bass guitar. Okay, then on the distorted tone, I do a little bit of extra work, like filtering out some spikes in there. This one, for example, is quite the offender. As well as this one. You notice when I switch to a different string, that frequency pokes out quite a bit. Okay, and while I'm working at it, I notice I can still optimize things. And then also this frequency right here. Okay, and then there's also this boxy, breathy, airy mid-range, pretty much smack down at 500 Hertz, so that can come out too. This just muddies up the mix, and there's no real definition in that frequency area. It doesn't add anything to the tone, it doesn't add any note definition, it doesn't add any distortion, it's just this constant white noise going on. Okay, then from here on out we go into a bus. And here, first of all, console and tape emulation. I do that for everything. Oh, let's lower the volume here again. Minus 5 dB. Then a little bit of compression within 1176, just get a little bit more punch on pick attack. And then some broad EQ moves, lowering that lower mid-range around 400 Hz a little bit. And then that mid-range around 800 Hz can have a very nice growl on bass, so I like to boost that at times. And also a little bit of that top range just to give it a little bit more sparkle and sizzle up there. Of course, a lot of these moves also happen when I'm actually listening to the tone in the whole mix. In the whole mix, I noticed that 400 Hz range, broadly speaking, kind of adds a little bit of mud, so I lowered that with this EQ in here. It's not the same thing as this EQ in here. This is for more specific and narrower frequency range that just has this constant going on. You see the EQ is also a little bit narrower, whereas this one is much broader. This EQ works in much broader moves and much broader belts. So this rather works on the whole lower mid-range. And then after that, TDR Nova for filtering the very low end and some high end up here. And also to use the dynamic EQs to get more control on these frequencies that poke out when I switch the string. Okay, and then TDR Nova again. This is sidechained with the kick drum. So whenever the kick drum hits, just that little bit of low end on the bass gets ducked down so the kick doesn't get obscured by the bass. So much for that. I just wanted to show you real quick what I'm getting with this whole new analog gear stuff and whatnot. Sounds so good if you ask me. I love it. That's it for this video. I shall see you next time.